Good morning, YouTube, and welcome back to another episode here at WILDMAN Lifts. I'm your host, WILDMAN. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly about a controversial subject in the fitness industry known as squat depth. Now, what kind of squats are we talking about here? There are many different kinds of squats out there. Some involve just using your body weight. Some you can use a kettlebell or a dumbbell. And others, you can use a barbell, which would be to optimize maximal load. And there's different ways you can use that barbell and different kinds of squats that you can do. And all of these squats are pretty easy to achieve the depth that we're talking about today. And that depth that we're talking about today is parallel. The appropriate squat depth for everybody is parallel. Now, what is parallel? Powerlifting, which has held the test of time, defines parallel as when your hip crease is below your knee joint. So why is squat depth so controversial? It's pretty easy to get to parallel or below parallel, or another term that they call ass to grass, which is your butt is as low to the ground as possible at the bottom of a squat, that if there were blades of grass, the grass would be touching your butt cheeks. Well, the reason why squat depth is such a controversial subject is because of the back squat. Now, the back squat is considered the king of all the other squats. And the reason why it is because your body is in the perfect position to lift maximal loads. Now, there's two kinds of back squats. There's something called a high bar squat, which is when the bar sits on your traps. So when you lower yourself down, the bar is over the middle of your foot and you're more upright. This allows you to get below parallel pretty easily. The other one is called the low bar back squat. This is when it sits a few inches below your traps and you're bent over slightly to get that bar over the middle of your foot. And you're using a lot more muscles with better levers to lift the bar. Because of that, the low bar back squat should be the squat that the average human can lift the most amount of weight with than any other squat on the planet. This is why powerlifting tests the back squat as one of the 3 exercises in their competitions. And the back squat has gained a lot of popularity. Strongman competitions have now come to include a variation of the back squat. You'll see Olympic weightlifters overloading their lifts by doing high bar back squats. CrossFit has even stepped into the world of testing 1 rep maxes in back squats in their CrossFit competitions. But a lot of people don't achieve the proper depth when it comes to the back squat, mainly because in the low bar position, the way that your body is angled and the way that your hips are set, you get kind of stuck at the bottom and you're unable to go any further, simply because your hip bones are not allowing you to go any further. This is due to a lack of mobility, which the average person after work, when they get into the gym, rarely has time to work on their mobility. Most people just like to get in the gym and get out within 30 minutes. And if you're doing back squats at low bar position, it's really hard to work on your mobility so that you're able to get to the proper depth in a back squat. So when it comes to the back squat, a good depth would be parallel. But parallel looks different to different kinds of people. So let's go over that. Let's talk about the good, about the back squat and proper depth. So here's the good. The good is when you go to parallel on a back squat, you're able to lift the maximal amount of weight. Every inch you go lower on a back squat is going to take 20, 30, 50 pounds off of what you could lift at parallel. This is why most power lifters only train to parallel. They don't ever try to go any further because the requirement is just to get your hip crease below your knee joint. As long as they do that, their lift is going to count in competitions. Plus, they'll be able to lift the most amount of weight, which is what people want to see. Spectators want to see massive amount of weight going up. But we also don't want to see something that we consider to be too high of a squat. Spectators don't like to watch that either. In strongman competitions, they often train with some kind of padding that they have to drop these comically big globes onto that are attached to some kind of big axle bar when they're doing strongman competitions and they're doing back squat for reps. Up until about 2 years ago, they actually had a curved bar that was at the Arnold Classic Strongman show, and those athletes still had to drop the bar down to some pads in order to achieve the depth that would count as a good lift. Now, the bad thing about training to parallel in a back squat is you're not working what's called a full range of motion. It is better to work on your mobility and better to get down below parallel at times, because you're going to be working more and more muscles and you'll be maximizing load. You want your range of motion for those muscles to stretch as long as they possibly can, so then they can contract a lot harder. This is how muscles get stronger, and this is how muscles grow. But the bad side of training below parallel when it comes to a back squat is the risk to injury ratio. The lower you go, the more your form is going to break down. The lower you go, the more stress you're going to place on your knees and your hips, and your big muscles that you're trying to work may give up as you go below parallel. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen every time. Again, if you work on your mobility, it shouldn't be an issue. But people who don't have the time to train mobility and to make sure that they're flexible enough to get below parallel on a back squat end up injuring themselves. So the next time you go to the gym, you can't get below parallel, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that when you go to the gym, you don't get hurt and that you're getting stronger each and every time you go. In order to do that, you got to go parallel or below. Now for the ugly truth about squat depth. Not to be rude, but when I go to the gym, I see a lot of people doing back squats wrong. And it's either one of two things. The first thing is they're not achieving proper depth. I'll see people that when I go into the gym, they are doing a back squat and they're doing what's called a quarter squat, which is they're only going a quarter of the way down. Then I see halfway squats where they go down and they think that they're low enough, but they're like 3 to 4 inches away from parallel. To be frank, you're not doing very much. And people will make the excuses all the time. Oh, I got a bad hip. Oh, I got a bad knee. Oh, I got a bad back. And then they only squat to that depth and think that that's okay, and they're going to get a pass because they have something that's prohibiting them from getting to parallel or below. You'd be better off switching your squat routine to something else, like to a front squat or to a high bar squat, to make sure that you're achieving the proper depth. Because if you're not achieving parallel or below, you're leaving out all the benefits and the very reason why you're even doing back squats in the first place. The second thing I see are people who believe that they need to go ass to grass on a low bar back squat, and they don't have the mobility to do that. That's where I see a lot of people get their injuries from. Because when they're at the bottom of the squat, they experience something called butt wink, which is when your spine is essentially giving up and you're not using your glutes anymore, and you end up risking a very bad injury as a result. So the ugly truth that you got to do is you got to train to parallel, and you got to train below, and you got to take your time. And you can't just go into the gym and try to force it. You also can't go to the gym and try to find an excuse not to achieve proper depth. In order to get the maximal effort out of your workouts, you got to be able to put in the work and work on your mobility so that you can get to that proper depth. And there's ways to do it. If you can't do it due to an injury or due to something that is beyond your control, then switch over to a different variation of the squat, such as the front squat or a Zercher squat, or doing it high bar or with an SSB bar, so that you're able to get to the proper depth. I really hope that this breakdown helps and that you're going to be able to go to the gym and maximize your back squats on your next lifting day. Until next time, thank you.